It would be late 60s, early 70s, and I met a guitar player called Lachlan McCall, who's still playing. In fact, I was playing with him a couple of weeks ago. And he was playing in a sort of function band, but he got me a gig in it. And then we started, he got me then into the jazz scene that he was playing in. He was a bit older than me. And a lot of the music at that time, there's an awful lot of trad bands in Edinburgh at the time. There must have been probably about a dozen actually of traditional bands, and not that much modern jazz. But he was playing in a modern band with Brian Keddy on trombone, and Gordon Cruikshank, who went on to start a jazz program on BBC, and then I ended up playing with Alex Shaw, local piano player, and Ronnie Ray was on bass, and we played together for well over 25 years, and ended up backing a lot of the American artists that came over for the festival, and we were based in the Caledonian Hotel in Edinburgh, and at that time there was quite a lot of touring American players came over, and up from down south as well, that didn't bring a band with them, so we ended up being a trio for them. And then I started playing with some of the more traditional bands, Mike Hart's band and Charlie McNair's band for a while, and that was good because that was different for me, different style. And it's just gone on from there, really, basically. I was a professional until about 1989. Then I got a job teaching percussion in schools, peripatetic, which I'm still doing part-time. You couldn't, I've not solely played jazz either. You couldn't make it, even an amateur basis, you couldn't make enough money to keep you going. Certainly not just based in Edinburgh. So all the jazz bands were, I suppose you would say, amateur, and that's sort of general through the whole of Britain, really. And a lot, or it was then, a lot of the jazz players were doctors or lawyers or whatever. There's a lot of that, and there still is, really. So no, it wasn't. There was no way you could make a vast amount of money. You still can't, Edinburgh had obviously been fairly small. It was quite incestuous. There was quite a lot of rhythm sections. There weren't that many bass players, and there actually weren't that many drummers. So you tend to get the same rhythm sections playing with different bands. It's a very small scene, and not much of a crossover with Glasgow. Strangely, even though it's only 40 miles away, they had their own scene. There wasn't an awful lot of back and forth in these days, certainly. But it was all very much. There was no sort of Arts Council funding at that point. That only came in probably in the 80s. Bodies like Platform were started up. So a lot of it was just the bands got their own thing together with no financial backing from anywhere. And there were a few regular jazz things. I'm thinking about the Traverse Theatre. I'm thinking about the other Pool Synod Hall, which was a theatre club, and then pubs, and very little in terms. Out with the Jazz Festival, very little in terms of concerts. You'd get the big ones in Usher Hall, like Oscar Peterson, whatever. But there was very. I would say the things like the Queen's Hall, where you'd have a local band with an American artist, that probably didn't really start until the mid-80s, I would think. So most of the scene from when I started was, and for the first 15 years or so, was in pubs, really. I think that, before that, I think a lot of it had been, there had been a lot of dances and a lot of music for dancing, which there wasn't really so much of when I started, but it is, I think, coming back. I think the two main changes have been, one big one is education. Various jazz courses run by people like Richard Michael. I was involved in these for a long time, and also the National Youth Orchestra jazz course, and then funding from various bodies, which it sort of led it to becoming a bit more more professionally regarded, I think, and yeah, I mean, that's happened in over the last 20 years, really. I think that's the biggest change, and it's all I mean, people like Tommy Smith's jazz course, and you know, it's now in the conservatory in Glasgow. It's so much sort of more seriously regarded level, I think, you know, than it used to be. There were no sort of touring arrangements or anything, really. I mean, that again only happened sort of in the mid '80s, you know, where you'd have a couple of gigs up in Aberdeen and places, and then Perth and things started. But no, but it was all fairly localized, really. One member of the band would be a band leader, and they would get the gigs, basically. You know, and that's still the way it generally works. I mean, nowadays, actually, a lot of bands, there's an awful lot of bands that are run by girl singers and they're very good at getting gigs, and that happens a lot. You know? I mean, I've just done a gig, actually, with the new band that I got together, and we did a gig at the Wiggum's Jazz Bar, and then what is the next step? That's the next thing. That, you know, that it's not as if you could just get an agent and they could organise things for you. It's not that easy. It's not... and once you've done the Jazz Bar and a couple of other venues that there are in Scotland, you know, you either just wait till you go around and do that again, or you have to think about something further afield. So the Edinburgh Festival, that was a big one, because that's when all the American artists came over, and that was great, because you know, you could stay in your hometown and they all came to you, which is lovely. You know? And Mike Hart has to be, you know, congratulated for getting that together, and that's developed a lot over the years. The style has changed from the older style of music, which is still represented, but I mean, it now covers a really broad spectrum. And then the Glasgow Jazz Festival came along a bit later. So I mean, these are the two, and I think now that a lot of people now actually tour a lot. It's available now. You know, you can go, you know, in Europe and down south, which people didn't really do in these days to any great extent. You know. But yeah, these are the biggest changes, I think. There would be a pub that everybody met everybody, and you would almost inevitably get asked to do a gig. You know, you're working on Saturday night, sort of thing. You know, that was the, which I think is the same everywhere. You know, it used to be in Archer Street in London, and it's up here it would be maybe Nicky Tam's or whatever. But I mean, I think musicians in general tend to be more colleagues and friends. You know, we meet on gigs and things. And that, I mean, drummers don't often tend to meet each other because you're the only drummer in the band. You know, so. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's a great thriving social scene, if that's what you mean. I mean, there's something like the Jazz Bar in Edinburgh is the hub of jazz in Edinburgh now, you know, but and that has been for the last maybe 15 years. When I started playing, there was, as I said, a lot of the traditional bands, and then a lot of the younger people were playing free jazz at that time. There was quite a lot of that happening, which has thankfully died out. I think it was, basically nobody other than the band like it, I think. So that there was that, and I think there's a general, you know, that was flirted with for a while, and I think there's a general going back to more mainstream styles now. You know, and there's also a lot of the younger people coming up are doing a lot of writing themselves, writing their own material. I think I would say that jazz is much more accessible to non-jazz necessarily aficionados now than it ever has been, really. And that ties back into the dancing thing as well, which I definitely see. I mean, I don't mean old traditional, you know, I'm thinking more of, I mean, I did a gig recently which was just a straight ahead swing band, and everybody was dancing to it. You know, I don't dance, I don't know what they were doing, but I mean, it wasn't like Charleston type thing, you know, it was and they were very young and they seemed to enjoy it, you know. And that's where jazz started off, so that seemed quite healthy to me, you know. used to focus on the Queen's Hall mainly, and venues in the Jazz Festival, and the Edinburgh Jazz Festival, which would change every year. You know. And there were people like Benny Waters and a lot of the ex Count Basie band members would come over. Errol Warren, people like that, and quite a lot of the London jazz players would come up. Roy Williams and you know, so that was a great experience for the people in Edinburgh. I got a chance to play with them. You know, and the players, well, there'd be people like Alex Shaw on piano, later Brian Kellock, bass. You had Ronnie Ray, Kenny Ellis, Ricky Steele did a lot of these things on bass. There was a good lot of good players in Edinburgh, especially at that time, you know, for whatever reason, you know, and there still are. You know. It's always produced really good players for the size of the town, Edinburgh. You know.